Let us pray. Each day in this place, each one of us is expected to face the ongoing challenge of representing the concerns of all Albertans. May God grant us strength and wisdom to carry out our responsibilities. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions.
Member for Edmonton Jasper Place.
Speaker, I move that the petition I presented yesterday, signed by 6,100 Albertans, now be read and received.
Thank you. Petition to the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. The undersigned requests legislation to delay all proposed pulp and other forestry developments in the province of Alberta until such time as 1. A class environmental assessment that reports the cumulative impact of all existing and proposed forestry developments has been completed, and 2. Full and complete environmental impact assessments equivalent to the Federal Environmental Assessment Review Process, SOR 84-467, including public hearings, have been completed for each proposed forestry development.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, I ask the petition that I presented yesterday be read and received, if that's in order.
Petition to the Legislative Assembly of Alberta.
Order, please.
The undersigned requests legislation to delay all proposed pulp and other forestry developments in the province of Alberta until such time as, number 1, a class environmental assessment that reports the cumulative impact of all existing and proposed forestry developments has been completed, and 2, full and complete environmental impact assessments equivalent to the Federal Environmental Assessment Review Process, SOR 84-467, including public hearings, have been completed for each proposed forestry development. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions.
Member for Edmonton Jasper Place.
Speaker, I rise under Standing Order number 40 to provide notice in view of an incident which sent 3 people to hospital yesterday, that I will move that the Legislative Assembly appoint a special select committee to consider, hold public hearings, and make recommendations regarding regulations, designating routes for hazardous cargo in rural areas, safety standards related to the construction of containers for hazardous cargo, training and safety procedures for operators who handle such cargo, and emergency safety procedures for dangerous occurrences involving the transport of hazardous cargo. It's motion number 203 on the order paper.
Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Member for Edmonton Avonmore, followed by the Minister of Career Development and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly the son of the member from Spruce Grove, Chris Woloshin, who is a grade 10 honor student in Spruce Grove. Would he please arise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly?
Minister of Career Development and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me a great deal of pleasure this morning to introduce some representatives from the Alberta Weather Modification Co-op who are here to watch question period. I might say, Mr. Speaker, with a great deal of pride. For the most part, they are from my constituency. As I call their names, I'd ask them to rise. First, we have Mr. Harold Howe, who is the chairman of the Weather Modification Co-op. Jim Christie, who is the former chairman of an advisory group that we had to this government on weather modification. Mr. Dick Page. I would note that Dick and his family are recipients of a Master Farm Family Award, and Mr. Jim Bishop, who has shown untiring efforts to promote this particular area. I'd like us to give them the traditional welcome of the House.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, in the Code Inquiry, clearly the former Corporate and Consumer Affairs Minister, and the term was used, was negligent. But frankly, Mr. Speaker, this whole government was negligent, including the Premier of this province right now, Mr. Speaker. I have a memorandum here dated November the 18th, 1985, more than 2.5 years before the government finally pulled the licenses of FIC, AIC. The Premier received a document from the then Treasurer Lou Heinemann, which reported 3 important findings. Number 1, the combined capital impairment of the companies was $12.8 million after combined losses in the previous 6 months of $13.6 million. Number 2, the situation may call for the suspension or cancellation of the companies. And finally, 3, it is possible that the regulators might have to invoke the provisions of the Act with respect to receivership and or liquidation of the 2 companies. Mr. Speaker, that's what the Premier knew back in 1985. Yep. My question to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, how is it that in his sworn statement to the Code Inquiry that the Premier said that he had no knowledge of the difficulties of FIC, AIC until February 1987?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable members may want to relive the Code report, but we've taken 2 years in Mr. Code has handled it, I think, in a very effective fashion in all details. The lawyers from both sides brought together all the evidence they felt they possibly could, including evidence from members of Cabinet who, as the members know, I asked the Honourable Lieutenant Governor to release ministers from their normal oath of secrecy on Cabinet matters. So, Mr. Speaker, I find it strange that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition now wants to redo the Code report. We've handled all of the testimony in the report.
Mr. Speaker, we were told day after day that they'd answer questions after the Code report came down, Mr. Speaker.
You said that.
And this has been a tragedy to a lot of little investors. It's going to cost the taxpayers, probably millions of dollars, Mr. Speaker. And I want to ask the Premier again, why is it then they said to the Code report that he didn't know anything about in 87 when clearly he knew in 1985? Tell the people the problem.
Right on.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member can go all through his indignant poses that he wishes. All of the facts were presented to the Code inquiry, all of them. And the honourable Leader of the Opposition is not able to run his own now. We've provided them with all the facts.
Mr. Speaker.
You said you'd answer.
Mr. Speaker.
Liar.
By the non-answer.
Pardon me. Order, please, not you, Honourable Leader. Did the chair hear liar called across this House? Would the member care to retract, please?
Yes.
Would you stand up and do
He didn't tell the truth.
Would you?
He said he would.
Honourable member, please don't make it any worse than it is. The chair now recognizes the Leader for the final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious matter, and I want the Premier to tell the truth to this Assembly.
Hear, hear.
It has to be one or the other. Was he not telling the truth to the Code Inquiry, or was it that he didn't bother to read the memo? Which was it? And tell the people here, because the eyes of Alberta and Canada are upon you.
Hear, hear.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I've just told the House, and the Honourable Leader can twist himself in all kind of contortions along with his House Leader. But I've told the House that all of the testimony, the accurate testimony from our government, was made to Mr. Code.
Sad day. Very sad day.
Hear, hear.
The second main question.
Mr. Speaker, to the Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General has reassured us in this House that the Cormie family and other principal executives will be brought to justice without delay, Mr. Speaker. In fact, things seem to be going so well, he's sort of rejected any personal intervention on his part, Mr. Speaker. But on Wednesday, the Attorney General confidently told the member for Edmonton Strathcona, and I quote, "I can assure the member that the police do know the whereabouts, maybe not minute to minute, but generally know the whereabouts of all players in this, Mr. Speaker." Well, yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the federal investigators apparently couldn't find Mr. Donald Cormie. I want to ask the Attorney General this. I take it that he has been in touch with the federal investigators, which would be his job as Attorney General, and I want to know today if the federal investigators have been able to locate Mr. Donald Cormier.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have any idea where Mr. Cormier is today, as I'm sure that the honourable member from Norwood has no idea from a moment to moment where his wife might be. A situation, Mr. Speaker, is that Mr. Cormier has been served, or they are going to serve him with papers that have a returnable date for Monday. His solicitors have publicly stated they expect Mr. Cormier to be here today. Mr. Cormier's location really is irrelevant to this whole matter until Monday. And if Mr. Cormier is not there Monday, a Canada-wide warrant would be put out for his arrest. A person who has been accused of something as serious as what is before discussion in this House and what is before the public right now in this very, very serious matter would be compromising his whole position of his proclaimed innocence if he didn't show up. I think we should wait until Monday to find out if in fact he is then served with the document. And Mr. Speaker, the leader from the opposition should try not to incite great public unrest for something that isn't there yet.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the most appalling performances I've seen. I've seen a lot. An answer like that, Mr. Speaker, I expected more from the Attorney General.
Hear, hear.
Now, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Attorney General, because he made the statement that they knew where the players were. Now he says, well, I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker. I want to ask him this question then. When was the last that he knew the whereabouts of Mr. Donald Cormier? Because they're supposed to be having an investigation on it.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, it's irrelevant whether I know where Mr. Cormier is. I am not like the honourable leader of the opposition who wants to have everybody under a magnifying glass, put a string on everybody. It's centralized action is what they go for. Mr. Cormier was at his cottage before. Where he is right now, I don't know. I said before, the relevant time is Monday. Again, we shall wait till Monday.
Mr. Speaker, I want to know who's in charge here. You said on Monday you knew the whereabouts, the police knew, and you could check that any time. Now you don't seem to care. And my point, Mr. Speaker, my question is, has the Attorney General even been in touch with the federal investigators to find out what's going on?
5 questions. Mr. Speaker, we care. We all care. This is a very, very serious matter. In fact, it's so serious that we've spent over $25 million to try and get to the bottom of it. We are now planning our response, a very considered and reasonable response. The matter of where Mr. Cormier is in relation to this specific action, first of all, is not the responsibility of the Attorney General or any member here or any member in the Assembly. The law courts have processed paper which is to be served on him, and it's returnable on Monday. If Mr. Cormier does not show up Monday, which is the relevant time, there will be a Canada-wide warrant for his arrest. That will take part. That's the process of the law. It is not for the Attorney General and certainly not for the Leader of the Opposition to be so pompous to think that you're going to have anybody at a specific time.
Honourable member for Vegreville, that's uncalled for as well. Member for Edmonton Glengarry, Leader of the Liberals.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday when I addressed the issue of the discrepancy between the memo with the 2-page summary that the Premier received in 1985 from the then Provincial Treasurer and the statement that he set out in his statutory declaration in 1987, I thought that the Premier would come forward and reconcile and explain why all of us are having difficulty understanding what appears to be two statements that are not in sync. We're not getting that information, and I'm dismayed that we continue to get thwarted and stonewalled on this issue. I'd like to put this question to the Premier. I'm going to, sir, allow the benefit of the doubt in saying that you probably didn't read the memo. On that basis, sir, do you feel that the regulators, that your deputy ministers, that your ministers owed you a duty to come forward and to explain that there was a very serious situation facing Alberta with respect to FIC and AIC?
Mr. Speaker, I have to repeat for the House that we have a very important matter.
Honourable member from Edmonton Kingsway. Order, please, Mr. Premier. It's enough. Excuse me a moment. Excuse me a moment, honourable members. Just hold it. Thank you. A question is asked. The heckling can at least wait until the first sentence is out by whoever has asked the question, rather than start to natter away before the person even gets a chance to get going. And as for Edmonton Kingsway, that's another matter. Thank you. Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I've told the House on quite a few occasions, particularly this week, that we have received a very important report on a very important matter. And the government will be making an assessment, a review and assessment, in a logical, reasoned way, and then making a statement regarding it, a statement of our reaction and action that we plan. We've told the House that time after time. If the honourable members want to try and dissect the report here in advance of that, I'm sorry, they are not going to be successful.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Premier this question. In the course of time between the memo coming to you in 1985 and your statutory declaration, or even the closure of FIC and AIC by the provincial treasurer, you made 3 ministerial appointments. Did you not ask the ministers that were leaving and those that were coming to discuss with you the major issues of that ministerial portfolio, the concerns, the problems that you should be informed of?
Mr. Speaker, even the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party surely knows that discussions between the Premier and members of Cabinet are not matters for public discussion.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to put the question one more time, but because I think it's so important to the people of Alberta. Please reconcile the obvious discrepancy that exists in the code report between you getting the memo in 1985 that clearly sets out the difficulty of FIC, knowing that you have a securities and a Royal Bank background, and the steps that you knew or should have taken. Why didn't somebody tell you what to do? Why didn't you do something? Please give us some guidance on this. I think the people of Alberta are entitled to know that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the honourable member reviewing some of my background regarding the Royal Bank and securities business, but I could only draw to his attention, Mr. Speaker, that there is no discrepancy except in his mind. There's certainly no discrepancy in Mr. Code's report.
Member for Smoky River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During this past week, we've had a series of meetings with small business owners from northern Alberta. Basically, they addressed the needs of what small business really needs in our part of the province. Their concerns addressed trained staff to accommodate the needs of service of new developments in the forestry industry. My question is to the Minister of Career Development. Is your department what efforts is your department taking to accommodate and enhance the skilled workforce to accommodate the needs of the forestry industry in northern Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the efforts that the honourable member for Smoky River and indeed the member for Grand Prairie have made in meeting with businesses and bringing this matter to my attention have been innumerable. And I would say to the honourable member that I think it's well known that Alberta trained probably at least 25% of the journeymen in this country over the last number of years, and indeed some of them left the province. And it is our desire to not only enhance the apprenticeship program, but to potentially look to some of those journeymen that are now in other places.
Madam Minister, are we going to have to go out of province to accommodate the needs of the journeymen, to accommodate the skills of the industry?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's a good question. We have a number of journeymen in government that are certainly very skilled people, and we are going to make sure, and I think that I made that abundantly clear in the estimates, that we would be taking on apprentices in government because indeed we have those skilled journeymen. However, there will be a shortage of journeymen. And we have a Red Seal exam that journeymen in other provinces can write, and we again are hopeful that some of those people will come back, because the journeymen are key in order to increase the numbers in our apprenticeship program.
Madam Minister, do we have adequate facilities to properly train for the needs of the small business operators in the northern part of the province, so that they can indeed adequately continue to service the growing needs that are developing?
Mr. Speaker, the small businesses that are in this area, particularly dealing with welders, millwrights, carpenters, and mechanics, they have always played a key role in developing skilled workers in this province, and I know that when the economy is flourishing to the extent that it is in Alberta, and it's very positive right now, that many of those workers end up going to the larger companies, and the honourable member, I know, will be thinking about the expansion that is proposed by Procter & Gamble in his area. Mr. Speaker, while it is key to get additional journeymen here located in the province, I think it's also important for us to recognize that we have so many workers in this province who are desirous of getting that training, and I know the honourable member for Athabasca Lac-La-Biche has been keying on this, and I might mention that there are programs that we are testing. One is in the Whitecourt Learning Centre, where we have people upgrading their education so that they may participate in the program, and there are just incredible examples of women who will become heavy-duty mechanics. There is a native lady with 8 children who is taking that upgrading and sees for herself a very bright future, and that is because of the incredible opportunities now abundant in our economy.
Thank you. Calgary Mountain View, followed by Calgary Buffalo, then Clover Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Code report finds that prior to 1985, when the present Premier assumed the leadership of the government, the auditors from Consumer and Corporate Affairs were accurately describing the problems at FIC and AIC. The Treasurer, however, when he assumed responsibility, insisted on his own department, the Department of Treasury, redoing the same work, which caused another delay. And then, apparently not trusting the finding of his own department, he decided to have an outside appraisal of FIC and AIC. Mr. Speaker, in view of the public document, which is a Premier's sworn statement before the Code inquiry, that the Provincial Treasurer did not inform the Premier that something would have to be done about those 2 companies until early in 1987. I'd like to ask the Provincial Treasurer, why did he not tell the Premier what he was doing in regard to these 2 companies?
Mr. Speaker, I guess over the course of the last 3 or 4 days, we've taken a consistent position, as the Premier has taken again this morning, that we were not going to rehash the Code inquiry. The inquiry is put in place to hear the evidence, provide testimony, to give the reasonable explanations. And I don't think it's incumbent in this legislature to rehear Mr. Code, and we've indicated already we will not be commenting further with respect to the Code comment.
Commenting to the media.
Mr. Speaker, the Provincial Treasurer is making all kinds of comments rejecting the Code report. People want to know why, when in July of 1986, the Treasurer knew that a massive injection of capital was needed to keep principal companies from collapsing, why did he not tell the Premier?
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, the member can look at the testimony. He can go through all the documents. Obviously, they've had their researchers over there searching for the documents. And in fact, as we said before, we stand by our former answer.
Which answer?
Are you the fall guy, Dick?
Shameful abdication of leadership, Mr. Speaker. Will the provincial treasurer...
Please, honourable member. Do we have a question on that last statement? Thank you.
Will the provincial treasurer stand in his place beside his boss and tell the people of Alberta why he did not pass on vital information to the Premier as soon as it became known to him?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, that is in fact the same question. The reasons, the process have been spelled out in the Code Inquiry, available now for public information. We'll be able to tell everyone, and we were asked those very questions in the Code Inquiry and responded to them there, sir.
To Calgary Buffalo. Calgary Buffalo, not Calgary Mountain View. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In February 1986, at the height of the crisis in our financial industry, when a strong, experienced administrator should have been put in charge, the Premier appointed the member from Peace River to be minister in charge of regulating financial institutions. The member from Peace River himself advised Mr. Code that he knew little about the Alberta financial industry or its problems, that he considered himself to be a promoter rather than a regulator, that he was not given a reason for his appointment by the Premier, who told him that he'd only be there for a short time. And indeed, he was been there only for 3.5 months while Albertans continued to be fleeced. I'm wondering whether the Premier would tell this House why he made the change and appointed the member from Peace River to be Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs in February of 1986.
Mr. Speaker, as I've already told the House today, and I'm sure you, sir, will not want us to repeat questions and answers in what is a relatively short question period, but my discussions with my ministers are obviously, and have been traditionally and always will be, a matter of a private matter between a Premier and his cabinet.
We're not asking for his private discussions. We want to know some of the reasons why he made certain moves. We also want to know whether the Premier spoke to the former Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs or any other person with respect to the problems that the financial industry was having, whether he informed himself before he made this important change in responsibility at that important time.
Questions? Mr. Speaker, the honourable member giving us his best Perry Mason act will just have to go on with the answer I've given him. He's asking the same question in a different manner, but the same answer applies.
Well, I'd remind the Premier that he didn't testify before Mr. Code and Alberta.
Order, please. Order. We're on the final supplementary. It's a supplementary question. It's no preamble. It's nothing else. And care is taken with regard to Beauchesne 411. Thank you. Calgary Buffalo.
Does the Premier recognize how irresponsible it was for him to appoint the member from Peace River to be in charge of regulating financial institutions at this crucial time when he obviously had such poor qualifications for the job?
Again, Mr. Speaker, it's, I guess, typical of the honourable member for Calgary Buffalo to make those kind of statements about another member of the legislature. It's quite a sad thing to watch him do that about a member who is not here, who is not here, and he is in fact asking the same question again. I only say this, Mr. Speaker, when he refers to not appearing before the Code inquiry. That was Mr. Code's decision. I was available.
Member for Clover Bar, followed by West Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is addressed to the Minister of Environment. The liming of Half Moon Lake is an ongoing experimental project with the objective to improve the water quality in the lake. There is concern by the private partners who have financially contributed towards this project, the residents around the lake, that the project may be abandoned. Will the Minister assure my constituents and the Assembly that this experimental project, a critical experimental project, will be completed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we can guarantee that it will be completed as an experiment, but relative to the commercial use of lime to control nutrients in lakes and other waterways is a matter that needs much more study, and the department is recommending that at least 3 to 5 years additional study be undertaken before we enter into commercial application of this particular process.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister give a preliminary indication, at least, on the basis of the 2 reports that have been issued by Dr. Ali Prepis on this particular lake about the relative efficiency or effectiveness of this technique?
Mr. Speaker, there has been some evidence that indeed the liming process is effective in reducing nutrient concentrations, but the research at this time is inconclusive, and it's for that reason.
Honourable Member, Calgary Mountain View, thank you very much. Perhaps you could adjourn for coffee outside, thank you. Minister of the Environment.
It is for that reason, Mr. Speaker, that the department is recommending that further research be undertaken, and that the individual mentioned by the honourable member be asked to provide a research plan that would involve about another 3 to 5 years of good solid work.
West Yellowhead, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar, then Calgary Fish Creek.
Mr. Speaker, it will soon be impossible for Albertans to travel east by rail, or for anyone living east of Alberta to come to our province on the passenger train. The looming cuts in via rail, Mr. Speaker, will only serve to further divide our country, a country originally brought together by railroad. Recent communications from the office of my MP, Mr. Clark, in Ottawa, confirmed that the final decision on implementing the cuts will be made in Cabinet on Monday, July the 24th, Mr. Speaker, and that will be the end to taking the train across our country. My first question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Now that the Minister has repeatedly told us just how concerned he is about this situation, can he tell us if he plans to express his feelings to his federal cousins in Ottawa of the outrage of Albertans feel about the decision of this magnitude being made behind closed cabinet doors with an order in council not allowing full parliamentary debate or public hearings? Will he officially oppose this conduct?
Mr. Premier, Mr. Speaker, I indicated to the honourable member, as I have done to other honourable members on a consistent basis, that we have made representations, strong representations to the federal government, indicating our opposition to the cuts in via rail service. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, what we have done is we've put together a task force whereby we're asking for input from the municipal areas that are affected with the cutbacks, so that we can continue that strong pressure on our federal counterparts, plus examine alternatives in the event that there are cuts. And I stress if in the event that there are, because it is somewhat hypothetical at this time, because they are going through that examination process. We recognize that VIA has had a substantial deficit. The federal government is rationing with that, but we don't want to see cutbacks at the expense of what we consider a very important tourism industry within the province of Alberta. In addition to that, I have had extensive discussions with the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Mazinkowski, and he's left me with the assurance that they are going to do their utmost to make sure the interests of Western Canada are protected.
To the Minister of Tourism, Mr. Speaker, I suppose there is some small relief in having services to the Rocky Mountains and Vancouver maintained, Mr. Speaker, but I would ask the Minister if he can give us his assurance that the Department will seriously consider reinstating rail service between Edmonton and Calgary, thus establishing a practical and efficient tourism loop through British Columbia and Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, we've been quite involved, and tourism depends on rail service in Western Canada. And just recently, on July the 10th, the 4 Western ministers of tourism got together to discuss many other things besides via rail, and are waiting with interest and want to have input into the changes that could become about because of the budget strain and changes that the federal government are making. One of the suggestions has been that that loop from Vancouver, Jasper, Edmonton, Calgary, Banff, Vancouver is a very natural tourist loop and should be considered in any changes. The Mountaineer service that we as a government helped promote last year was one of the most successful legs of Via Rail, and it stands out very clearly that that's one that may be and should be expanded. And I think the success of that, Mr. Speaker, speaks for itself because we're marketing a specific product. And part of the problem that Via has is their system is so large across Canada that unless we market those different legs and different parts of it as specific products, that passenger increase won't be there.
Mr. Speaker, back to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. I'd like to ask the Minister if he, the Premier, or anyone in this government has specific plans for helping the more than 1,000 Albertans, in fact 1,000 persons in Edmonton alone, who will very soon be unemployed due to these cuts in transcontinental rail service.
Mr. Speaker, the question is very hypothetical, as you can appreciate. We are naturally very concerned, and it's a consistent concern that this government has had as it relates to employment opportunity for Albertans. We take into account every aspect to ensure that Albertans do have employment opportunities, and this is just one area that I've indicated to the honourable member earlier that we are taking action in to ensure rail service, the employment of Albertans, and a number of other variables so that we can make sure that Via Rail does offer a consistent and comprehensive service to the province of Alberta.
Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we know that the Premier changed ministers in Consumer and Corporate Affairs and other portfolios in February and May of '86 and moved the responsibility for the principal group to Treasury from Consumer and Corporate Affairs later in that year in June. Mr. Speaker, in his affidavit, the Premier tells us that this was done without discussion with anyone and based on knowledge he'd gained from being on the boards of directors of public companies, including the Royal Bank, and further that matters related to financial institutions should, if possible, be the responsibility of a single government department. Now, Mr. Speaker, I respect the Premier's comments earlier that discussions that he has with his ministers are private discussions, but here we have a case where the Premier appears to have made an important substantive change in isolation without discussing it or being informed of the problems of the department in advance. I find it very difficult to believe, in fact bordering on irresponsible. Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, will the Premier please tell the House why he made this decision without what appears to be any discussion whatsoever with the ministers involved?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend has already led into her question by saying that she believes and respects that discussions between the Premier and members of his cabinet are not for private discussion, and then asks for them. And frankly, the same reply I've given to other members today, the one who sits not far behind her, my answer still applies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, is the Premier then telling us that the problems being encountered by the principal group had nothing whatsoever to do with his decision to make the Treasurer responsible for financial institutions?
Mr. Speaker, again, the answer applies. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I noticed the honourable member used the term irresponsible. I've been meeting with some Albertans. I met with them yesterday, and they were pointing out to me that both comical and irresponsible were the way the leader of the opposition parties were as they rushed to get on television in front of each other without even having read the report. That, the people of Alberta think that was a joke of those two.
Giant and renegade. Is that what you got at the bull sale?
Mr. Speaker, if I could just get back to the subject at hand. Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, there were 4 different ministers responsible for financial institutions after the Premier took office. Can the Premier explain to the House whether there was any information shared with any of those ministers about the serious problems of Principal Group before, as he has stated, February 1987?
Sounds like a form.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for Gold Bar, my honourable friend, I must say, is continuing to ask the same question, and there is no other answer than the one I have given her.
Perhaps the honourable member, not all honourable members have their Beauchesne with them, but they would be good enough to look up 411 in Beauchesne. Further limitations are generally understood, although they may not seem to be understood this morning. A question may not, 1, talk about legal questions and interpretations of statutes, and 2, seek information about matters which are in their nature secret, such as decisions or proceedings of the Cabinet, etc. Perhaps we now could move on to Calgary Fish Creek, followed by Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, the question I ask today is directed to the Minister of Health on behalf of the thousands of couples in our province who have tragically been unable to conceive a child. Could the Minister clarify for the Assembly today, or possibly explain, the government health care insurance policy position that denies any insurance assistance to infertile couples making use of in vitro fertilization clinics at a personal cost of many thousands of dollars?
Mr. Speaker, the matter of in vitro fertilization and its coverage under the Alberta Health Care Insurance Plan is one that is definitely before us as a policy issue as a government, and I commend the honourable member for raising the issue in the Assembly. First of all, I'd like to note that the Alberta Human Rights Commission is currently reviewing the matter because several of the couples to whom the member refers have asked that the matter be reviewed in that context. The issue of new reproductive technologies has enormous consequences for us in a health, in a legal, and in an ethical sense across the nation. And I was very pleased that the federal government took the initiative to establish a Royal Commission on new reproductive technologies, and certainly this will be factored into any of the policy issues. As I indicated, the issue is clearly whether or not a publicly funded insurance plan, as we have in this province, should provide those services, and it's certainly something that we will have to review as a government once the Human Rights Commission reports.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while the Minister is quite properly awaiting the results of the Human Rights Commission review, in the interim, would she be prepared to consider covering the costs of those basic supplies and diagnostic procedures, such as blood tests, that are covered in virtually every other type of diagnostic work?
Mr. Speaker, I would have to take that question on notice because, in fact, there are some of the procedures with respect to this procedure which are covered under the health care plan within our existing health system. As to which are and which aren't, I would take the question as notice and respond back to the honourable member.
Well, final supplemental, Mr. Speaker. In a day when birth rates are dropping and abortion rates are climbing, and the number of babies available for adoption falls far short of the demand, would the Minister comment to the House, or commit to the House, to expedite her policy review and decision regarding insurance coverage for hospital-based procedures related to infertility?
I will make that commitment, Mr. Speaker, but I think it's important to make the distinction of the policy issue which the honourable member has mentioned. The issue, as I've said, with respect to in vitro fertilization is the one of a publicly funded health insurance plan covering the service. The issue of abortion is a very different issue in a legal sense, because the issue of abortion has been adjudicated by the Supreme Court of Canada, and our policy position in this province reflects that decision. The in vitro fertilization process has not been reviewed by the Supreme Court to deem it a legitimate medical service under the Canada Health Act, and therefore the two are very different in the legal sense. I think that's an important point to put on the record. Nonetheless, with respect to the question of dealing with it as expeditiously as possible, I will certainly commit to that.
Bakerville, and if there's time, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a sad day indeed when Albertans realize that they can't trust the government to tell the truth about their secret deals with the Don Cormys and Peter Pocklingtons of the world.
Yes.
Now, on March 3rd, 1988,
That's right.
the Conservatives approved a $67 million package of loans and loan guarantees to Mr. Pocklington to, and I quote, develop two significant capital projects, a hog slaughter plant in southern Alberta and an upgraded and modernized beef and pork processing plant in Edmonton. Now, Mr. Speaker, the ministers have admitted, more than 1 year later, that this money was not to build, upgrade, or create anything, but was intended to cover Mr. Pocklington's high-risk debts at the Continental Bank and give him some general-purpose operating money. And I'd like to ask the Minister of Economic Development, what is he going to say to the hog and beef producers of Alberta, the workers at Gainers, and the good people of Picture Butte, who believed that the taxpayers' money was going to be used to build and upgrade facilities and to create jobs in the province, not just to bail out their good buddy Peter Pocklington?
Mr. Speaker, we've seen on a consistent basis the innuendo that the honourable member deals in. We saw it consistently with the quote affair, whereby this government, under the direction of our Premier, brought forward the most extensive inquiry that could be possible, whereby all the facts were released. We've also seen, again, whereby the honourable member is attempting to twist the facts as it relates to our commitment to the food processing sector within the province and our commitment to the job creation aspect within this province. He indicated that there wasn't a commitment on our part to upgrade and build a facility. There is that commitment, and that is why we involve ourselves, not because of the individual concerned, but because of the processing facilities that are required for the province of Alberta. I can point, Mr. Speaker, and I have pointed, to a number of other food processing companies within the province of Alberta that we have offered support to, and we're doing so, Mr. Speaker, on the basis of the increase in quality of life to the residents of this province, and also so that we will have first-class facilities for our primary producers. Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member isn't concerned, and he shows an inconsistent concern for job creation and our farmers, let him be honest about that and admit it. Our support is for the food processing sector and the individual primary producer.
God, that's a leadership hopeful?
Mr. Speaker, people unfortunately expect incompetence for government, but they neither expect nor deserve dishonesty.
That's right.
And I'd like to ask the Minister, with him bragging about his new interest shielding program that reduces operating loan interest to 14% for small business and farmers, how on earth does he justify giving operating loans to Peter Pocklington at 9.6%?
Yeah, right.
Mr. Speaker, again, the honourable member conveniently forgets that we have a program in place in excess of $2 billion whereby we guarantee interest rates at 9% for the farming population. This loan is in excess of what we're giving to our primary producers, but the honourable member conveniently forgets. It's a program that has been accessed by in excess, I believe, of some 17,000 farmers in the province of Alberta at an interest rate of some 9 percentage points. But the honourable member conveniently forgets that, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's important that we remind honourable members opposite what we are doing for our primary producers, whereby there's a program in place in excess of $2 billion for our primary producers in the province of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, Peter Pocklington's quoted as saying, in relation to brighter days ahead for Gainers, I have financially backstopped the company. He should be reminded whose money it is, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to ask the Minister just how long is it going to take this Minister to realize that Albertans don't want you using their money to cover Mr. Pocklington's butt, and demand that that $6 million be returned and used for some real job creation projects in this province?
Mr. Speaker, it's as I indicated in dealing with the honourable member a few days ago, I recognize it's against the House rules to indicate how he is attempting to distort the facts.
But I should indicate to him that we're going to continue to make sure that our primary producers have first-class food processing facilities within this province, because without those first-class food processing facilities, it means a net loss to them as it relates to their returns. We're going to... Mr. Speaker,
time for question period has expired. Point of order, Edmonton Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, I rise under Beauchene 409 sub 12 with respect to the questions that the honourable member from Fish Creek put to the Minister of Health. It's my understanding that the matters that we'll be dealing with today are matters involving the Minister's portfolio, that these matters could easily have been put to her during the course of those estimates, that all this did was take up urgent time that the opposition, or time needed to put urgent questions to the opposite side with respect to the code matter. And in the past, Mr. Speaker, you've jumped up and ruled these questions out of order, and I wondered why it didn't happen today.
Point of order, Calgary Fish Creek.
Mr. Speaker, in that the Honourable Leader of the Liberals made reference to me in my participation in question period today, I would like to respond to his point of order and suggest to you that it is not a point of order under Beauchene for two reasons. First of all, he implied that this is not an urgent matter. On behalf of thousands of infertile couples in Alberta, I can assure that member it is an urgent matter. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to respond to his suggestion that we delay the discussion to Committee of Supply. He's been here long enough to know that there's very limited public exposure to the debates that go on in supply. I want the discussion here where it can be exposed for all our province.
In response to the purported point of order, the Chair would point out that the Chair has been watching to invoke the rule of anticipation, which is a different one than the one stated here by the Honourable Member for Glengarry. The appropriate subsection would have been 410 subsection 11 rather than 12. The Chair was watching, and there was some concern with regard to the line of questioning, but in terms of the broad policy concerns, the broad issue, that was fine. In one of the supplementaries, there was some concern about getting into the matter of financial aspects, which could indeed have been dealt with in terms of estimates of the Department of Health to be heard later today, if the member is able to get in terms of that discussion. So the Chair takes it as notice, but felt that the Chair was in order to allow it to proceed in terms of the broad issue. As to whether or not government members' participation in parliamentary question period is a matter of delaying or not, that's a purely subjective matter in terms of your own opinion or mine. Chair recognizes another point of order, the Associate Minister of Family and Social Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise under Standing Orders 23I, where it clearly states that it imputes false or unavowed motives to another member. Mr. Speaker, I rise in deference to the remarks made by the Honourable Member for Vegreville, who referred to not having had the opportunity of Hansard in front of me to review or the Blues. He did say that, and I believe it impugns all honourable members of the government when he states making deals with such likes as Cormorys and others. I state, Mr. Speaker, emphatically, the full report of the Code inquiry by Mr. Code has been made public. It's there. It's an expense of some $25 million. I think government's position is clearly outlined within the report. Mr. Speaker, I'd like the opportunity to exercise my right in this House by raising the point of order, and that's why I stand here. If other members are not prepared to listen, then I'll sit down until they are.
No. Vegreville is not recognized. Member Minister proceed to the point of order without response to any catcalls which may or may not occur. Briefly.
There certainly is no connection whatsoever with the remarks that the honourable member has raised, Mr. Speaker, and I would certainly ask him to withdraw, because I certainly have not sat on this House, in this House, as a member of government and I'm involved in any such deals, and I wouldn't want that to be impugned that way.
Member for Vegreville speaking to the point of order.
Government with respect in the general sense, and I can appreciate the Associate Minister of Family and Social Services frustration at not being involved in some of the secret deals that other members of government make with these guys, but it's a matter of public record that deals are made and they won't be discussed. The Minister of Agriculture said in the House that I will not share the details of any discussions that I've had with any processors in the province. You can check Hansard, and there's been all kinds of secret deals, I submit, made between this government, Cormy and his buddies over the last 10 years that resulted in this mess. But I appreciate your frustration, Honourable Minister.
Chair will examine the blues. Under before orders of the day, we have notice of a standing order 40.
Mr. Speaker, just speaking briefly to the urgency of debate, there were two further spills on the Grote Road and another one on 111th Avenue yesterday of okite carbaway, which is a trade name for methylene chloride, a somewhat more than somewhat toxic chemical. 3 innocent people were sent to hospital, and the Edmonton Board of Health is currently searching for others who may have suffered harmful effects from exposure to this chemical. After this matter was raised in the Assembly earlier this session, the government was specifically warned it's only a matter of time before people get hurt. There was a report issued citing a regulatory vacuum dealing with the fact that there are no standards in Alberta for containers that hazardous chemicals can be carried in. Well, Mr. Speaker, the regulatory vacuum has become a leadership vacuum. Nothing's being done by the government, and the urgency is that this motion calls for the Assembly to step in into the vacuum created by the lack of government action and to set up a process. We're going to get some regulations in place. Therefore, I'd seek unanimous consent to move to motion number 203.
Honourable member, please refer to standing order 40. Only one person gets to speak to it to make the request to the House. Those in favor of granting unanimous consent, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. No. The request fails. The chair would also point out that it is somewhat unusual to have a request and a motion come forward which is already on the order paper and already has been discussed to some degree. Perhaps a different degree of creativity could be brought to bear with respect to a request under Standing Order 40 in terms of the wording of a particular